Welcome to Sex Talks. My name is Sar Surmick. I'm a sex educator and marriage and family therapist from Redmond, Washington. Today we're here to talk about sex. We're starting a series of conversations about sex, sexuality, and sexual identity. I've been asked many times by people, why sex? Why talk about sex? You know it's controversial. You know it's uncomfortable for people. You know it brings up all of these things. Why do it? Why talk about sex? My first response, I usually get the huh face. My first response is that it's fun. Talking about sex is an enjoyable thing. It can be sexy, it can be witty, it can be humorous, and it can bring up all these really cool and interesting ideas. Then I get back, well, you're a therapist. You know, you're supposed to talk to people. And that's true. I like talking to people. I like sitting and discussing with people the issues they have and what's going on in their lives. I like talking about sex. I'm comfortable talking about sex, but not everybody is. And the problem comes in when our professionals, our nurses, our doctors, our therapists, our psychologists, whoever, people who work with clients, the problem comes in when they're not comfortable talking about sex, when they have their own issues of fear and shame, guilt, doubt, etc. So my truer answer is that I talk about sex because it's important, because it's part of who we are as human beings, and because it's part of what makes us human, part of what makes us ourselves. It's part of our identity. So yeah, I talk about it, and I try to get other people to talk about it. So how many of you remember the first time you had the sex talk? That first time somebody sat down with you and tried to tell you about the birds and the bees, or whatever animals they so chose. For most people, it was their parents, and usually their mothers. They would sit down, maybe with the sweaty palms, try to calmly and nicely explain to you what was going on. And when they would get to the end, they would ask you if you had any questions, praying to whatever God they worshiped that you didn't. Sex then, after that talk, becomes the ghost that wanders the house, which everybody can see, but nobody wants to talk about. Many of you probably had health class, some health class in 5th or 6th or 7th grade, where you got a nice and boring and mostly uninformative talk that sounded kind of like your teacher reading the ingredients off a cereal box, after which they would simply tell you, don't eat the cereal. All of us got horrible advice from friends, peers, older siblings. Good intentioned perhaps, but they got the same bad advice from their friends, their peers, and their older siblings, which they were just passing on. Before the digital age, those of us who grew up before the digital age, we would go into the back of the library and sneak books out of the back of the stacks. Sometimes we wouldn't even check them out. We would just put them in our bags, kind of wander away with them. Those of you who grew up after the internet, after learning that parental controls are a thing that kids use to keep their parents from knowing what they're doing, found that the internet is really just a large collection of older peers. They just have more pictures. I'll tell you a personal story. When I was in 5th grade, I went to a Catholic school. In my school, sometime in the spring, the well-meaning but rather severe nuns sat us down and said, we are going to have an important health discussion today. Then they took the girls and they put them in one classroom, and they took the boys and they put them in another classroom. And we got to sit down and watch a video called Our Changing Bodies, where I learned as a boy that I would grow taller, that I would get hair in weird places perhaps, that I might have wet dreams, which I thought were all about water at the time, and that a man and a woman get together and they have a baby when they're married, when they're in love, and because God says so. I always wondered after that talk how much better the girls' talk must have been, because obviously they had to have gotten better information than I did. I was lucky. My mom was an obstetrics nurse. That's a nurse who works delivering babies. She gave me all sorts of info. I knew how babies were made from like a really young age. And then as I got older, she would give me more and more technical information. I knew about birth. I knew about gestation. I knew about how babies come out of mothers. I knew about hormones and puberty and all this technical medical information. It took me 2 years to figure out how people actually had sex. I didn't know it at first. It took me 2 years to figure out how intercourse actually worked after, being able to explain the full gestational cycle of a human fetus. I don't think I was slow. I think it was just, I couldn't put all the pieces together. How many of you were like me? Somewhere you got good information. Maybe it was a book, a good teacher, or someone. They gave you good information. And then you had this really cool thing that you wanted to share. And you found that you couldn't. I learned the hard way. I learned that when you try to correct people about, bad information, a problem, that their response inevitably is one of shame. Maybe it's ridicule. Maybe it's defensive. They turn away or walk away. In my case, there was actually physical violence. Locker room stories were okay. Crude jokes were okay. Making boastful comments about what they did with their girlfriend at some point. Those were okay. But talking about giving good information, not so much. Here's the thing. People learn that sex is shameful. We learn that sex is something that is filled with fear and repressed guilt. That sex somehow becomes a monster that comes to eat the souls of the innocent. It's not. Talking about sex is a good thing. Talking about sex is an important thing. Research tells us that kids given accurate information about sex wait longer to have sex, and they do so more safely. When we look at countries like the Netherlands, who have a culture that's built around open and honest discussion of sex, we find that the first time kids have sex is delayed. They wait longer. We find that they talk more to their parents and have more open and honest communication. They have a lower rate of teen pregnancy. They have a lower rate of sexually transmitted infections. And we have anecdotal evidence that tells us when a person has more personal comfort around their sex, around their sexual identity, that they have a higher self-esteem, they have better interpersonal relationships, they engage in less oppression with other people, and they have better sex lives. As I've become an adult, and especially as I've become a therapist, I find myself tilting at the same windmills that I did when I was a child. Generally, I encounter similar, if more polite, resistance from people. They don't want to talk about it. They change the subject. They move on to something else. People have internalized shame. They hold on to those feelings of fear, and it makes it hard to talk about sex, this thing that's a part of our lives. The more I talk to people, the more I find that all those people with that shame and fear held deep inside them, they still need good information, and they still need someone who's willing to stand up and just talk about it. When I talk to professionals and other therapists, I try to keep things simple. So I have just two rules about sex. The first rule of sex: talk to your clients about sex. The second rule of sex: maintain firm boundaries around sex. Now, we generally teach our professionals the other way around. We tell them that having sex with a client is bad. We tell them that this is harmful to the client, that it's damaging to people, that it ruins our professional relationship. All those things are true. But doesn't that sound a lot like the abstinence-only education that most of us received in high school? We know that doesn't work because it's a whole list of what not to do. We owe it to our clients to maintain professional relationships and professional boundaries with them. That's very important. It's part of the healthful relationship that we have with the people we help. My belief is that we do that by maintaining an open and honest communication around sex and sexuality. That we talk to them about their understanding, about their own feelings, their beliefs, their ideas, their thoughts. I think we do it by helping them determine what are appropriate boundaries. I think we do it by helping them to hold on to those boundaries once they've determined what it is for them, and that after that, we help them identify where their blind spots are, so that when something comes up in a session, or when you're talking to someone, or something springs something on you, you're not surprised by it. Now that's how I like to work with professionals, to help them get past the issues that they have with sex and sexuality. It's a great model when working with clients. In fact, I use the exact same model when I work with clients. I help them be open to talking about it. I encourage their self-understanding and acceptance of who they are. I help them to define appropriate boundaries for where they're at in their life. Not some lofty ideal of what those boundaries should be, but specifically for that client in that moment. We don't help our clients by avoiding sex. We don't help them by avoiding sexual issues, sexual topics, or talking about anything regarding it. People are geared to avoid that already. They come to us with years of cultural influence, shame, and fear. They carry it around with them. They carry it deep inside them. We help by modeling interest, curiosity, acceptance, and a positive attitude towards sex whenever we possibly can. So here's the thing, sex is good. Our Western culture pretty much, and I think we can all agree on this, has a pretty negative view about sex and sexuality. There are taboos and a variety of oppressions that pervade all of our lives. They're firmly entrenched in our schools, our churches, our governments, and our homes. The message I want to give you today is that there is hope. There are groups and individuals working to bring about a sexual renaissance. They're working to move us from a sex negative to a sex positive outlook. Now, what does a sex positive outlook mean? To be sex positive means to hold a belief which promotes and embraces an open sexuality. The sex positive movement regards all consensual sexual activities as fundamentally healthy and pleasurable. It encourages sexual pleasure and experimentation, both for the individual and between individuals. And it makes no moral distinction among the types of consensual sexual activities regarding these choices as matters of personal preference. The other thing that being sex positive means is acknowledging that we are sexual beings. Not only are we sexual beings now, but we have been sexual beings for a long time in our evolutionary past. There are issues of sexual dimorphism, sperm competition, and a wide variety of biological markers that suggest our ancestors had a lot of sex. And they probably had sex not in the monogamous way and the monogamous ideal that we have today in our culture, but in a much more open style of relationships. We'll talk about monogamy versus non-monogamy in a later talk. We are human beings. We give and take pleasure from the act of sex. Our brains and our bodies are wired for it. It is a normal part of what it means to be human. There's nothing wrong with taking pleasure from sex. Doesn't matter what kind of sex you're having. Taking pleasure from it, feeling good about it, that's a healthy thing. There's a legacy of shame and fear and oppression that comes down to us from our culture. But it's not something that we need to pass on. We don't need to pass it on to our clients. We don't need to pass it on to our partners. We don't need to pass it on to our families. And we don't need to pass it on to our children. So I will admit to you that I am not a simplifier. I admire people who are. They take really big concepts and they distill them down into easy to understand pieces. Instead, I am a complexifier. I take things that seem simple, that are common sense, and I expand them, unfolding into different textures, colors, and complexities. The word sex is one of those things. It by itself, just the word, is a highly complex idea. We use it to describe so many different things. We say, are you biologically male or are you biologically female? That's sex typing. We ask how a person appears to other people. You know, are you a girl? Are you a boy? Are you a man? Are you a woman? That's called sex determination. We use sex to describe a person's attractiveness. Wow, you're sexy. Unfortunately, we also use it to talk about an object's attractiveness. We say, ooh, sexy car. A little confusing there. We use sex to talk about the act of intercourse itself. And we use sex to talk about a wide variety of sexual activities, which can include, but are not limited to, vaginal intercourse, anal intercourse, cunnilingus, fellatio, digital penetration, digital manipulation, erotic touch, autoerotic touch, masturbation, foreplay, and the list just kind of goes on and on and on from there. If you have any questions about that list, we will try to cover that in another talk. When we talk about sex, one of the things we need is clarification. We need to ask people what they mean when they're talking about it. How are they using the word? What is their intention? Because there are so many things around it and so many issues that come up when we talk about it. How complex then, when we weave the concepts of sex, sexual identity, and sexual activity into our laws, our education, and our system of beliefs. So, question for you. How many of you have filled out a form lately? I know I have. They have little boxes, M and F. When I fill out these forms, I always wonder, what exactly are they asking me? Are they asking me my genotype? You know, what my chromosomes say about my sex? Are they asking me my phenotype? What my genitals and my secondary sex characteristics are? Are they asking me my sex expression, how I appear to other people? Or are they asking me my gender, which is what I believe myself to be, how I feel on the inside? To honestly answer any of those questions would take a lot more than 2 checkboxes. So, I mean, that's my problem. Genotype, there are 6 common sexual genotypes. Okay, 6. Phenotype can be described in a wide variety of ways. I often use 8, but it's really a spectrum that we can talk about on where you fall on the spectrum. Sex expression, because it's about what the other person perceives, is an even more complex spectrum. And gender, well, gender's all about personal identity. You know, it would require a large box on the front of the form with space to continue the essay on the back of the page. When we try to determine what a person's sex is, it has huge implications for how they live. We talk about male or female. It changes the difference between how much you're likely to make in your life. It changes the difference of what diseases you're likely to get. It changes how your insurance works. It changes what people expect you to act like, and it changes how they react when you go against that expectation. Furthermore, the determination of sex has 2 parts. The first part is, how do we determine what an M equals and what an F equals? This is not a simple distinction. Some of you may remember recently the Olympic Commission has been struggling with this very fact. It's not simple, and it creates a lot of problems when you fall outside of those 2 checkboxes. The second part, and probably the most important part, is who gets to decide what it means to be an M or an F. I want you to sit and think about that for a minute. Somebody else, somewhere, somebody sitting maybe off in an office somewhere, gets to determine who you are because of a little checkbox. It's the basis for keeping people locked into a simplistic binary system that is used and has been used for a long time to promote oppression, shame, and control. And it doesn't need to be that way. As we enter into our new sexual renaissance, as the youth of the information age come into their power and start to enter the workforce, they start to change the world. All of these binary distinctions, they are no longer valid. People are out there in the world. They are having sex in more ways than I could relate in the entire time you've sat here and watched this video, which I say would be an interesting talk, but we'll save that for another lecture. People are out there having sex with a wider variety of partners and in a wider variety of combinations than we've seen in the past, or at least that we knew about in the past. And people are out there defining who they are. They're not doing it by the old system, but they're finding the words and the ideas that work for them. And that's the way it should be. Identity is the new watchword. It's not about the boxes on the forms. It's not about the way other people choose to define us. It is about the words a person uses to define themselves. And it's about what those words mean to them. If we're working with people as professionals, or we're just sitting at home talking to the people we care about, and we really want to reduce the influence of oppression, shame, guilt, and fear, then we must start asking people how they identify. And more importantly, we really need to sit and listen to their answers. I really hope that this talk has brought up ideas, thoughts, fears, wonderings, and most importantly, curiosity. I truly hope that you can go home tonight, sit around the table with family and friends and say, hey, let's talk about sex. I hope that you'll turn to your next client and say, I know this might be hard to talk about, but I'm really curious about how you identify. And I hope that you'll be able to go home and look in a mirror and ask yourself the question, who am I? And what do I believe about sex? For my part, I will do my best to keep talking. I will do my best to talk about sex, sexual identity, sexual complexities, sexual issues, sexual types, sexual ways. If you can think about it, I will try to talk about it. I'll do it because it's fun. And I'll do it because it is so very important. This discussion has just been the opening. When it comes to sex, there is so much more to talk about. Thank you. Have a good day.